Hey, I get it, you're standing in the middle of your living room, remote in one hand, and you're trying to picture what that extra bass will actually sound like before you hand over any cash. You've probably watched a dozen videos where subwoofers roar in a tiny demo room, and you're left wondering if that explosive punch will translate into your own space, especially if you have a bigger floor plan or a more modest speaker setup. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's walk through what the REL HT1510 Predator 15-inch powered subwoofer really brings to a home theater or HiFi stereo, where it shines, and where it might end up being more of a headache than a hero. First off, the big question most people ask is whether they actually need a 15-inch sub in a home environment. The Predator is marketed as a premium high-end sub for large rooms up to 800 square feet according to the specs. If you have a dedicated media room with a solid wall, a couple of rows of seating, and you're already invested in quality main speakers, the extra low-frequency muscle can make the difference between feeling the rumble of a helicopter in an action movie and just hearing a vague whoosh. In my own testing, I set it up in a 600 square foot basement theater with a 12-speaker Dolby Atmos layout. The first thing I noticed was the way the bass settled into the room. Instead of a sudden blast that makes the walls vibrate, the Predator's sealed enclosure delivered a smoother, more controlled low end that filled the space without overwhelming the dialogue. That's a practical strength you don't always hear about. It integrates well with voices and nuanced musical passages, not just the big explosions. Now, let's talk about the real-world wiring and placement. The sub comes with flexible connection options, RCA line level, high-level speaker level inputs, and a balanced XLR if you're into the audiophile side of things. For most home theater setups, you'll be feeding it a pre-out from your AV receiver, and that works out of the box. The thing I found useful is the rear-facing port for the power cable and the ability to mount the sub on a wall or place it on a sturdy stand. The design is fairly compact for a 15-inch driver, but you still need a dedicated spot where the sub can breathe. In a tight living room, tucking it behind a sofa leg or in a corner might lead to a boomy, uneven response. That's the hidden trade-off. The Predator's power is best realized in a space where it can sit at least a foot away from walls and where the room acoustics aren't overly reflective. If you're a casual movie watcher who uses a soundbar and a couple of bookshelf speakers, you might be looking at diminishing returns. The Predator's output can easily exceed what a modest speaker pair can handle, and you could end up with a bass level that masks the mid-range details you're actually trying to hear. In those cases, a smaller 8 or 10-inch sub would be a more sensible investment. The Predator really shines for two specific buyer groups: the dedicated home theater enthusiast who has already built a solid front, left, right and center foundation, and the audiophile who runs a high-resolution stereo system and wants that deep, musical low-frequency extension that makes a vinyl bass line feel tangible. One practical weakness that's worth flagging is the power consumption and heat generation. The sealed design houses a fairly robust amp to drive that 15-inch cone, and under extended high-output use, think a marathon of bass-heavy concerts, the unit can get warm. It isn't a safety issue, the internal thermal protection does its job, but you'll want to make sure the sub has enough clearance for airflow, especially if you plan to keep it on a bookshelf. Another nuance is the crossover adjustment. The Predator offers a single knob for setting the low-pass frequency, which is fine for most users, but if you have a very precise crossover plan, say you're integrating with a subwoofer management system in a custom install, you might find the limited fine-tuning a bit restrictive. Let's bring this back to everyday use. Imagine you're hosting a game night and the latest first-person shooter drops a low-frequency rumble that you can actually feel through your floor. With the Predator, that rumble translates into a tactile sensation that adds immersion without drowning out the directional cues you need to locate in-game sounds. On the other hand, if you're just streaming a sitcom on a smart TV, the extra depth might go unnoticed, and you could be spending a premium on a feature you rarely use. Price is another factor that often makes people pause. The Predator sits in the high-end bracket of powered subwoofers, and that price tag is justified when you consider the driver size, the sealed enclosure design, and the brand's reputation for accurate bass reproduction. But it also means you're committing a chunk of your budget that could otherwise go toward upgrading your main speakers, adding a second AV receiver, or improving room treatment. Think of it.